The Tea Biz podcast delivers tea news that you need to know. A recap of the week's major headlines with commentary and cultural trends hosted by Dan Bolton. It is the voice of origin for tea professionals and enthusiasts worldwide.
Tea is a fascinating and intricate topic, far more complex than anyone can master. Our expertise resides in storytelling by professionals who know the tea lands from birth and speak the native tongue. We believe that transparency is grounded at origin, which is why the Tea Biz portal enlists 40 voices skilled in 12 languages to tell the story of tea. Hello, everyone. Here are this week's headlines. A new report examines the causes of gender-based abuse in tea. It's a case study of James Finlay, Kenya, following the BBC expose. Tea price protests in India continue for a third week. And high temps have lowered yields of Turkey's Black Sea tea. More in a minute, but first, this important message.
What makes a perfect cup of Ceylon tea? The perfect cup is from the tea businesses that ensure the protection of all the children living within their tea estates. We salute Kailani Valley, Telawakili, Bogawanthalawa, Harana, and Eliptia tea estates. Support Save the Children, Sri Lanka.
Widespread gender-based violence and harassment concealed in commodity supply chains withers in the public spotlight, says a consortium of gender and tea sector experts. This week, the consortium, led by Women Working Worldwide and Thirst, the International Roundtable for Sustainable Tea, published a report that, quote, describes the underlying causes and multiple perilous risk factors associated with gender-based violence and harassment for women producing and processing tea. The report opens with a case study of James Finlay, Kenya, a company featured in the BBC Panorama expose, Sex for Work, The True Cost of Our Tea. The expose aired in February 2023. Titled, Consent, Just Consent, Then You Can Come to Work, a direct quote from the expose, the 70-page report scrutinizes the challenges within the tea industry, pinpointing how GBVH enablers manifest specifically within the tea sector. An infographic developed by Thirst and WWW with tea chain sustainability expert Michael Pennant-Jones illustrates 15 risk points along the supply chain. Smallholders, for example, risk abuse due to invisibility and lack of coverage by labor laws. There is a power imbalance at weigh stations where clerks or supervisors determine daily payments. In the factory, women risk abuse associated with allocating tasks, shifts, and working hours. On plantations, women face domestic violence and abuse risks in allocating housing and security issues. In a press release, the authors explain their roles in supporting James Finlay's formulating and assessing gender policies, so they are ideally placed to explore why those policies ultimately failed to protect women on the tea estates. Quote, the document delves into James Finlay's journey in establishing these policies and the supplementary measures taken to integrate women's protection into their operations, reads the release. A central issue highlighted is the persistently low wages for female tea workers, resulting in malnutrition, indebtedness, and the adoption of precarious survival strategies such as transactional sex. Gender-based pay disparities exacerbate women's vulnerabilities, with many relying on piece-rated plucking to bolster their earnings, even if they reside on the estate. Mechanization of harvesting further exacerbates the problem by by rendering numerous women tea pluckers redundant, particularly in East Africa. Furthermore, the women in the tea sector frequently shoulder sole responsibility for their families, managing both unpaid domestic care work and paid employment. This dual burden often confines them to abusive work environments." End quote. The report is available to download at no charge at www.thirst.international or women-ww.org. Tea farmers in South India's Nilgiris began a third week of protests to draw attention to declining green leaf prices. Workers participating in the Save Tea Farmers demonstrations are agitated but not violent, united in demanding a floor price of around 35 rupees per kilo for raw leaves. Shaji Cheval, president of the Federation of Small Tea Growers Association, told Omanorama that entire villages near Uti, Kathagari, and Kunar are out in the streets this time as people struggle to make ends meet. In Uti, more than 1,000 small tea growers, including women, regularly gather in protest. There are an estimated 82,000 small tea growers in South India. He said, quote, "Today, farm laborers live a far better life than farmers. When you receive 11 to 14 rupees per kilo regularly, input will be cut, labor will be reduced, and the harvest will happen no more than once a month, causing a further dip in the quality of tea and producing mediocre tea dust." End quote. Protests began on September 1st as green leaf prices dipped to 10 rupees or less. Workers want the government to set a floor price between 120 and 150 rupees for tea dust sold at auction. Dust currently sells for as little as 90 rupees, which is well below the cost of production. A spokesperson for the Nakabiri Badaga Welfare Association, representing tea farmers associations in the Upper Nilgiris, said there are plans to intensify the agitation in the coming days. The cost of producing tea is rising, with labor rates nearly doubling and fertilizer prices near record highs. Green leaf prices stalled 2 decades ago and continue a slow decline, except during the pandemic, when a shortage of tea raised the average price to 25 rupees per kilo. Farmers in 1998 received 16 to 18 rupees per kilo, but a glut of tea in the early 2000s drove prices down to 8 to 10 rupees. Rates for the 2 decades that followed stabilized around 10 to 14 rupees per kilo. A slack demand for tea for export is responsible for the recent dip. CISL Ratings projects India's tea industry will record an 8% dip in export revenue in the current fiscal year. The ratings service projects domestic tea drinkers will account for 82% of overall volume sales this year, but export volume, which makes up about 30% of total sales, will decline to 12% of the output by volume, down from 18% by volume in fiscal year 2022. Tea yields at Turkish farms bordering the Black Sea have declined for the 5th year in a row. According to Mehmet Erdogan, the head of Turkey's Rise Community Exchange, unusually high temperatures and irregular rainfall are to blame. Erdogan told the Hürriyet Daily News that, quote, "When we look back 5 years, we see a decline in tea farm yields ranging from 18 to 20%. Tea production was at 860,000 metric tons in 2021, a recent high. The harvest produced only 583,000 metric tons last year, and the 2023 crop is now only 520,000 metric tons as the third harvest of the year draws to a close. Turkey's tea industry, which employs more than 1 million, is concentrated in 4 northern provinces of Riyadh, Trabzon, Artvin, and Giresun. Erdogan said temperatures in Riyadh crested at 37 degrees centigrade, that's about 98 degrees Fahrenheit, for 20 days this summer. Quote, "The tea plant is not prepared for this. Extended periods of no rain and high temperature have caused the plant to focus more on self-preservation than yielding a crop." End quote. Arvinda Anantharman in Bengaluru reports on tea auction prices for Sale 37.
India Tea Price Report for Sale 37, the week ending 16 September 2023. The mood continues to be dismal in the Nilgiris. Small tea growers whose livelihood depends on tea have been holding a protest against low prices since September 1st. They're demanding a minimum price of 35 rupees per kilo of green leaf to be fixed. The green leaf prices have been lower than rupees 15 per kilo in recent months, fixed monthly by the tea board based on auction prices for the previous month. The Badaga community that's leading the agitation is an indigenous community from the Nilgiris, and they work primarily in agriculture. And they're calling this the last battle, implying that if prices don't improve, tea cultivation will no longer be viable for them. The Chrysler Ratings report has also projected an 8% decrease in export for this fiscal year, and which is already being reflected in reduced prices. In Sale 37 at the auctions, overall 21,953 tons of tea were on offer with a sale volume of 74% and an average price of 174 rupees per kilo. CTC saw a sale volume of 72%, averaging 170 per kilo, while Orthodox Leaf fared better with 91% sale volume and 216 rupees per kilo. North India continues to rely on major blenders and exporters from the Middle East and CIS countries. Prices were lower than or similar to the previous week, although overall North India Orthodox saw 92% sale volume and an average price of 234 rupees per kilo. In South India, CTC averaged 101 rupees per kilo, while Orthodox averaged 134 rupees per kilo.
And now, a word from our sponsor.
Hi, I'm Nish. I grew up in an organic tea farm and founded Nepal Tea Collective in 2016. Tea is not just a beverage for me, but a catalyst for social change, sustainably empowering hardworking artisans like my parents for the past 30 years. I'm on a mission to make the whole world aware of the goodness of Nepali teas and the good that comes from supporting growers in this remarkable land. If you haven't tasted Nepali teas yet, you're missing out. Our award-winning teas are making headlines. Find out why. Visit Nepal Tea Collective's website to get a free sample of this extraordinary taste of the Himalayas. That's nepalteacollective.com. Or just send me an email at nish, Nish, at nepalteacollective.com. Cheers.
This week, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization's World Heritage Committee, meeting in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, inscribed as a World Heritage Site the cultural landscape of old tea forests of Jingmai Mountain in China's Yunnan province. The citation recognizes the efforts of the Bulang and Dai tribes responsible for devising and maintaining forest cultivation of more than 1 million trees for over 1,000 years. The model they created, climbing high into the limbs to harvest leaves from trees untreated by chemicals, predates tea gardens and plantations and survives profitably today. UNESCO inscribed 5 well-preserved ancient forests on its World Heritage List, totaling 1.2 million trees on Jingmai Mountain. 2 rivers and steep valleys bound the 1,200 acres under tea. Jingmai is China's 57th World Heritage Site. The forest dates to the Quaternary Ice Age. Yunnan is where tea trees likely first evolved. Ancient cultivars growing there rise to 30 feet, with crowns spanning 36 feet and trunks several feet in diameter. The oldest have survived 3,200 years. The cobblestone road leading to the wild tea forest surrounding Mengjing village rattled my teeth. Tribal roads built by the Bulang and Dai are not designed for access or comfort. The single lane crosses 2 fast-moving rivers and traverses steep slopes that kept invading armies at bay for centuries. As a result, Jingmai Mountain is a precious time capsule. The forest trees are magnificent. Food crops and cultivated tea are restricted to land below the ridges. Partition forests were planted to buffer the ancient groves. Low-hanging clouds that resemble the ocean in motion span narrow valleys between peaks crowned with small villages of 1,200. Tea has been harvested for centuries, mainly for use by the tribes. The oldest trees are 2,700 to 3,200 years of age. The oldest trees displaying large-scale human cultivation are roughly 1,500 years old. The citation reads, quote, Jingmai Mountain exhibits the ecological ethics of harmony between man and nature and between man and man, offering significant aspirations for sustained development and multicultural coexistence in today's world. The indigenous people used horizontal and vertical land use techniques to create a smart mountainous settlement, an outstanding example of sustainable cultural landscapes of mountain forest farming. End quote. Jingmai is the first World Heritage Site inscribed for its tea culture and horticulture. The UNESCO citation highlights the ancient practices of cultivation and preservation, as well as magnificent scenery. In anticipation of the announcement, many of the 5,000 residents who live on the mountain built a huge bonfire and cheered when word arrived on September 19th. When I visited in October 2016, Nan Kang, the mayor of Beijing and chief of the Bulang, said that in-country visitors first discovered the pristine destination in the mid-2000s. Tourism surged to 400,000 travelers a year before the pandemic. Annual income per capita has almost doubled from 15 to 25,000 won, about 3,600 U.S. Previously sold in bulk, the pu'er teas, hand-picked and processed by villagers, are now branded and sold online. 94 co-ops have been established since 2008. Last year, a Jingmai villager, Jian Jin, told CGTN that he earned 5,000 to 6,000 won per live stream session and occasionally tens of thousands of won, end quote. 90% of the people within the UNESCO boundaries plant and process tea. Revenue from tea accounts for 75% of household income. Production was 268,000 kilos in 2018, with output averaging 227 kilos per hectare. Spacing in the forest is irregular, with an average density of 1,000 trees per hectare. In 2018, tea from Jingmai sold for an average price of $160 U.S. per kilo. The average price of tea globally that year was $2.85 per kilo. Chief Nan Kang worked closely with the National Cultural Heritage Administration for several years before the 400-page nomination was submitted to UNESCO in December 2020. The process began in 2015 with a survey of all species of trees within designated 100-meter square altitudes in the Jingmai Mountain average about 1,400 meters. Annual rainfall is 1,800 millimeters, with 90% of rainfall occurring May through October. Temperatures there average 18.4 centigrade, a pleasant 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Moisture rising from two rivers generates what's called a sea of clouds for about 180 days between October and April, guaranteeing the region remains humid even during the dry season. It is forbidden to use chemical fertilizers and pesticides in the old tea forest. It is forbidden to plant any other crops in the old tea forest. Hunting wild animals in the old tea forest and destructive plucking of leaves is also strictly prohibited. Violators, if convicted, forfeit management and harvesting rights in the tea forest. Li Kun, China's Deputy Minister of Culture and Tourism and head of the National Cultural Heritage Administration, emphasized the importance of prioritizing protection and management measures for ancient tea forests, villages, and traditional residential architecture to balance heritage preservation and development. Intrigued by what you heard in today's podcast? Would you like to learn more from our global network of Tea-Biz journalists and tea experts? Remember to visit the Tea-Biz website for more comprehensive coverage. That's www.t-biz.com. Thanks for listening. Farewell till next week.
Produced by Adavita Studios. Connect your voice to the world.